The croissant was still warm. That detail matters because for 6 years every meal I ate was cold. Cold coffee at my desk. Cold rice at 11 p.m. because I'd missed dinner again. Cold everything because the company I gave my life to didn't believe in pauses. Didn't believe in breath. Didn't believe in the idea that a man who runs himself into the ground eventually becomes the ground. That Tuesday morning in Paris, sitting at a small iron table outside a boulangerie on Rue Claire, watching the city move like a slow golden river. The croissant was warm, and for the first time in 6 years, so was I. My name is Daniel Raza. I'm 38 years old. For the past 6 years, I have been the Chief Operating Officer of Meridian Capital Group, a mid-sized private equity firm that, under my tenure, grew from a $200 million portfolio to just under $1.4 billion. I didn't do it with luck. I didn't do it with charm. I did it with 16-hour days, cancelled anniversaries, a drawer full of unread books, and a particular kind of quiet suffering that men like me are taught to call ambition. The firm was founded by my father-in-law, Gerald Ashworth. He'd hired me 7 years ago before I married his daughter, Camille. He'd told me then, in his office on the 41st floor with the city spread beneath him like a map of everything he owned, I don't hire family, I hire talent. If you're good enough, you'll prove it. If you're not, I'll let you go just as fast. I believed in the meritocracy he preached. I bled for it. The Paris trip had been Camille's idea. Or rather, her ultimatum. She placed the printed itinerary on my keyboard one Thursday evening in February, the way you place an intervention letter. 7 days. France. A renovated apartment near the Marais with a skylight above the bed. We haven't had a holiday since our honeymoon, she said simply, and we both know how that ended. She meant that I'd worked through most of it too. Calls from Gerald. Urgent restructurings, a portfolio company in crisis. Camille had sat on the beach in Santorini reading novels while I paced the villa's terrace in a suit jacket, spreadsheets open on my laptop. I'd approved the Paris trip with Gerald's assistant, Mrs. Hollings, 3 weeks in advance, formally, in writing. Gerald had even signed off on it, a single-line email. Fine. Don't let things burn down. So there I was. Tuesday. Paris. Warm croissant. Camille was still asleep. The apartment had good light. The coffee was the best I'd had in years. Dark, slightly bitter, with that particular Parisian arrogance that somehow made it honest. I had my phone face down on the table. I was watching pigeons argue over a piece of bread near the fountain across the street, and I was thinking, genuinely, thinking that maybe I'd been wrong about what life was supposed to feel like. My phone buzzed. I ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. I turned it over. Gerald Ashworth. Calling. I answered on the 4th ring. Gerald. I said it the way I always did. Neutral, professional, ready. Daniel. His voice had a particular texture when he'd already made a decision. Smooth. Too smooth. Like ice over moving water. I'm going to need you to come back. I have 5 days left of approved. I know what you have. A pause. I'm restructuring the leadership team. I set down my coffee. Gerald, if there's a personnel issue, we can handle it remotely. Whatever needs. You're the personnel issue, Daniel. The pigeons across the street kept arguing. The city kept moving. Somewhere behind me, an old man laughed at something his wife said, and the sound of it, pure, ordinary human, felt like it was coming from another world. Come again, I said. Your position is being eliminated, effective immediately. Mrs. Bulth. Hollings will coordinate the logistics of your departure package. He paused again, and I could hear him breathing, measured, controlled, the breathing of a man who has rehearsed this. You've done good work, Daniel, truly. But the firm needs new direction. New direction. I repeated the words the way you repeat words when you're trying to understand if they're real. Gerald, I built 60% of what that firm is worth. The Hartwell deal alone was a team effort. I was the only one in the room for 4 months. Daniel. His voice sharpened slightly, the gentleness evaporating. This isn't a negotiation. This is a notification. Enjoy Paris. The line went dead. I sat very still. The croissant had gone cold. What I found when I stopped shaking, I didn't go back upstairs right away. I sat at that iron table for 40 minutes, maybe longer, watching Paris live its life without any awareness of mine. A woman walked past with tulips. Two students argued in French about something that sounded urgent and probably wasn't. A child dropped an ice cream cone and screamed like the world was ending. I understood the child. When I finally went back upstairs, Camille was awake, sitting in the kitchen with her own coffee, her dark hair still loose from sleep. She looked at my face and put her mug down slowly. What happened? Your father fired me. She didn't flinch. That was the thing I noticed first. She didn't flinch. She looked at me with those dark, serious eyes of hers, and I saw something move across her face. Not surprise. Something quieter than surprise. Something older. When? She asked. 10 minutes ago. She nodded, very slightly, like a woman confirming a thing she already suspected. Camille. I sat down across from her. Did you know? She looked at her coffee. I knew he was thinking about restructuring. That's not what I asked. A long silence. He mentioned, she said carefully, that he thought the firm had outgrown certain roles. Certain roles. I stared at her. My role. Daniel, how long ago did he mention this? She didn't answer immediately, and that pause, that small, terrible pause, told me everything. This hadn't happened this morning. This hadn't been sudden. Gerald Ashworth, my father-in-law, the man I had made nearly a billionaire, had been planning this while simultaneously approving my holiday. He'd let me leave the country. He'd waited until I was 6 hours away, with warm croissants and open sky, and then he'd called to detonate the thing I'd built my life around. And his daughter had known. Not the timing, maybe. Not the exact moment. But she'd known it was coming, and she'd still packed the suitcases and handed me the Paris itinerary and said, "We need this trip." I thought about that. I didn't explode. I didn't raise my voice. I simply sat with it. The way you sit with a very bad diagnosis, still and clear-eyed, because the only useful thing now is to understand exactly what you're dealing with. I see, I said finally. Daniel, I'm sorry. I should have, no. I held up my hand, not coldly, just firmly. Not right now. Right now I need to think. I went and stood by the skylight. Paris stretched below, ancient and indifferent and beautiful. I thought about 6 years. I thought about every deal I'd closed, every crisis I'd absorbed. Every night I'd sat in that glass tower building something that had Gerald Ashworth's name on the door and my fingerprints on every wall. And then I thought about something else. 6 months ago, during the Meridian annual review, I had quietly, as part of my COO responsibilities, commissioned an independent valuation of the firm. Standard practice. I had it filed away in a personal cloud folder, encrypted, because that's the kind of thing you do when you work for a man who operates on instinct rather than process. The valuation was $1.38 billion. And I knew something Gerald didn't know. I knew. Meridian Capital Group had a debt problem. Not catastrophic, not visible from the outside, but real. 3 overleveraged portfolio positions, one of which was hemorrhaging quietly behind a wall of deferred reporting. Gerald was old school. He trusted relationships over analysis. He'd been papering over this particular problem for 18 months with bridge financing from a private lender named Rosenthal Partners. Rosenthal Partners. I pulled out my phone and opened my contacts. Marcus Webb, senior partner, Rosenthal Partners. We'd sat on a panel together in Singapore 2 years ago, and afterward we'd had whiskey and talked for 3 hours about the future of private equity and why most firms were run by brilliant men with catastrophic blind spots. Marcus had handed me his card and said, "If you ever want to build something real, call me." I stared at that number for a long moment. Then I called, building the fire. Marcus picked up on the second ring. "Daniel Raza," he said, and I could hear him smile. "I wondered when you'd finally call." "I need 48 hours of your time," I said, "and I need to know your current position on Meridian Capital." A brief silence. "That's a specific question." "Marcus, I just got fired by phone from Paris. I'm not in the mood for indirection." He laughed, a short appreciative sound. "Come to London. Can you be here by tomorrow morning?" "I can be there tonight." I booked a Eurostar ticket from Gare du Nord. 2 hours and 16 minutes to London. I packed a single bag. Camille stood in the kitchen doorway watching me, and there was something on her face. Regret, I think genuine regret, but I couldn't afford to live inside that right now. "I'll be back in 2 days," I said. "Daniel, please don't do anything rash." I almost smiled. "Camille, in 6 years I haven't done a single rash thing. I think I'm owed one." I kissed her on the forehead, because whatever had happened, she was still my wife, and I still loved her, and I was old enough to know that complicated things can be true simultaneously, and I left. On the train, somewhere between the French countryside and the dark of the Channel Tunnel, I opened my laptop and began to work. Not frantically, methodically. The way I'd always worked, with precision and patience and the kind of cold clarity that only arrives when you have nothing left to lose. I built a model. I knew Meridian's books better than anyone alive, including Gerald. I knew every asset, every liability, every covenant on every credit facility. I knew where the bodies were buried because I was the one who'd had to figure out how to keep them underground while building new things on top. I knew about the 3 over-leveraged positions. I knew about the Rosenthal Bridge financing. And I knew, because I had read every page of the original agreement, that Rosenthal held an option to convert their debt position into equity if Meridian failed to meet certain performance thresholds within the next 90 days. Gerald didn't know. I knew about the option clause. He thought it was buried in a subschedule that no one but the lawyers had read. I had read it, and I knew from the numbers in front of me that Meridian was 14 weeks away from missing those thresholds. By the time the train pulled into St. Pancras, I had a complete picture, not just a picture, a plan. An audacious, watertight, absolutely lethal plan. Marcus Webb met me at his office in Mayfair at 9 o'clock that evening. He was younger than you'd expect, 42, boyish-faced, with the calm of someone who had seen enough catastrophe to find it interesting rather than frightening. We sat in his corner office with the city lights behind him, and I laid out everything I knew. He listened without interrupting. He was good at that. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You want us to accelerate the trigger on the option clause," he said. "I want you to exercise the right you already have. Meridian is going to miss the threshold. We both know it. The question is whether you wait for it to happen passively, or whether you move proactively and bring in a partner who can structure a proper acquisition, and that partner would be you. That partner would be a vehicle all set up. I have commitments I can activate within 72 hours. This was true barely. Over the years, I'd maintained relationships with 3 family offices and 1 institutional LP who had all, at various points, indicated interest in backing me directly if I ever chose to move. "I'm not asking you to take risk. I'm asking you to take a meeting." Marcus studied me. "Gerald Ashworth is going to view this as a hostile act." Gerald Ashworth fired me by phone while I was eating a croissant in Paris. I'd say the hostilities began on his end. Marcus laughed, longer this time. He leaned back, looked at the ceiling, and when he looked back at me, there was something in his eyes that felt like respect. "All right, Daniel," he said. "Let's talk terms." The quiet before the next 6 weeks were the most intense of my life, and I say that having spent 6 years in a pressure cooker, I moved fast but invisibly. That was the discipline of it. Gerald had to believe for as long as possible that I was simply a fired executive processing his departure. I completed my offboarding documentation with perfect cooperation. I returned my company laptop. I attended the single exit interview Mrs. These, Hulling scheduled, answered every question professionally, and signed the standard separation agreement, which, critically, did not include a non-compete clause, because Gerald had always considered himself too powerful to need one. That was his first mistake. Behind the scenes, I was moving like a current under ice. The vehicle I structured was called Vantage Holdings. Within 30 days, I had secured $180 million in committed capital from the 3 family offices and the institutional LP, all of whom had heard, through quiet channels, that I was available, and all of whom moved faster than I'd expected. People who know your work don't need much convincing. Marcus and the Rosenthal team did their part. When Meridian missed its Q1 threshold, as I had predicted to the week, Rosenthal formally exercised the option clause. It was a legal mechanism, clean and documented. And Gerald's response was exactly what I'd anticipated. Fury, then denial, then a scramble to find alternative financing. The alternative financing he scrambled toward was a consortium I had quietly ensured would not be available to him. I want to be clear about something. I did not destroy Gerald Ashworth. I didn't need to. The destruction was already built into the choices he'd made. The over-leveraging, the deferred reporting, the arrogance that had led him to fire the one person who understood his firm's architecture well enough to keep it standing. I simply made sure I was standing nearby when it fell, and that I was the one holding the net. Vantage Holdings submitted a formal acquisition offer for Meridian Capital Group on a Thursday morning in late May, 41 days after I'd been fired by phone in Paris. The offer was $940 million, below the firm's stated valuation, but above what anyone else would pay given the liability exposure, which was now public knowledge. It was a fair offer. More than fair. It was, by every objective measure, the best outcome available to Meridian's investors and creditors. Gerald had no choice but to accept. The room where it happened. The closing meeting was held in the same conference room on the 41st floor where Gerald had first interviewed me 7 years ago. The irony was not lost on either of us. The city was still spread beneath the glass like a map of everything. The difference was whose name was now on the door. Gerald sat across the table from me. He was 64 years old, and he looked, for the first time in all the years I'd known him, like a man who understood that he had miscalculated. He looked at the documents in front of him. He looked at Marcus Webb, at my attorney, at the institutional representatives, and then he looked at me. "You planned this," he said. "No," I said honestly. "You planned this. I just paid attention." "Daniel, I want to say something, Gerald, and I'd like you to hear it as a professional courtesy." I kept my voice level. "You built something real. Meridian was a good firm. It had integrity once, and it had vision, and for a long time the people inside it believed in what they were building. That part, the early part, I genuinely respected." He was watching me. "What you couldn't see," I continued, "was that respect has to flow in both directions. You can't take everything a person has, their time, their expertise, their sleep, their marriages, their croissant, and then end it with a phone call while they're sitting in Paris. That's not leadership, that's extraction." Gerald was quiet for a long moment. "You're going to hold a grudge about a phone call?" "I'm going to hold a boardroom," I said. "The phone call is just context." I signed the final page. Epilogue. The croissant was warm again 3 months after the acquisition closed. I flew back to Paris. Camille and I had spent those months in a different kind of work, harder in some ways than the deal, because it required a different kind of honesty. She had known more than she'd told me. She hadn't orchestrated anything, but she'd been her father's daughter long before she was my wife, and there were loyalties she'd protected at my expense. We talked about that. At length, with a couples therapist in Notting Hill who charged a frightening sum per hour and was worth every penny. We didn't fix everything. Marriage doesn't work that way. But we rebuilt something, carefully and deliberately, the way you rebuild any structure that survived a flood, checking every beam, replacing what can't hold weight, making it stronger in the places it failed. Back on Rue Cleur, at the same small iron table outside the same boulangerie, I ordered 2 coffees and a croissant. Camille sat across from me with her sunglasses pushed up into her hair, reading a novel she'd already started twice but never finished. The croissant arrived warm. I ate it slowly. Vantage Holdings was now managing $1.1 billion in restructured assets. I had hired back 14 of the 22 people Gerald had let go during his final year, including Mrs. Hollings, who had turned out to be a significantly better CFO than her previous role had allowed her to demonstrate. Gerald had accepted an emeritus advisory title, ceremonial, toothless, offered as a dignity rather than a function, and had so far attended 0 meetings. My phone sat face down on the table. Somewhere across the street, a child was eating an ice cream cone very carefully, both hands cupped around it, concentrating. "You look different," Camille said without looking up from her book. "Different how?" She turned a page. "Lighter." I considered that word. Lighter. 6 years of weight, the accumulated mass of every sacrifice, every skipped dinner, every cold coffee. And what had finally removed it wasn't the deal, not exactly. It was the moment I'd understood that I had always had the power. I'd simply been giving it away. "Camille," I said. She looked up. "Thank you for making me take the trip." She held my gaze for a moment, those serious dark eyes, and then she smiled. Small. Real. "You're welcome," she said. The pigeons were still arguing near the fountain. The old man's wife was laughing again. Well, maybe it was a different couple. Paris didn't keep records of such things. It simply continued, warm and ancient and utterly unconcerned with the private victories of ordinary men. But I kept records, and I knew exactly what this one had cost. And I knew with absolute certainty that it was worth it. The croissant was warm, the coffee was honest, the city didn't care, and for the first time in 6 years, neither did I. END.